Welcome to this podcast, My Positive Birth, a little corner of the internet where I will be collecting positive stories from women birthing their babies across the UK. My name is Lisa. I'm a doula in southwest London. I have 3 children and 2 positive birth stories. I truly believe that we can all learn so much by listening to the positive stories of women and families who have gone before us. What their birth experience was like, what they did, how they felt, how they feel now, a few months or even years later. So come and surround yourself with positive birth stories, told in women's own words. And I hope you'll find a village here to calm you, but also to inspire you and give you confidence in birth. All women and babies deserve a positive birth experience. So let's get cracking on today's episode. Hello everyone, I'm so excited to be joined this week by Aileen. Hello Aileen.
Hi, thanks so much for welcoming me.
No, it's brilliant. I literally can't wait for this episode. So it's not going to be too much from me. I want to hear from Aileen. And Aileen, could you just start just by telling us a tiny bit about yourself and your family?
Sure. So my name's Aileen White. I have 2 children and a husband. We've been married 23 years and my kids are now just started secondary school and one's in primary.
Lovely, thank you. And obviously we're here today to talk about your births. And just, it's a very broad, sweet question, but would you say that both of your births, you said you had 2 children, were they both positive experiences?
I think now, 9 and 11 years later, yes, I look back on them as positive experiences. At the time, I might have told you something different. I've done lots of work following up what happened. But yeah, I've got some really lovely things I'd like to share with your listeners if they're up for listening.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you so much. And just if you mentioned it, I think one of the things I hope will come across as I do the podcast is that birth, it does stay with you. So, you're saying 9 and 11 years later. In a way it stays with us and our experiences grow and we still learn and develop. So I'm very pleased to kind of hear your reflections on all of that. And if you're happy, then yeah, just go for it and start wherever you'd like to about the kind of story of your births.
Cool, no problem. Yeah. I think the story of our birth and the birth experiences we have does grow with us over time. And that's one good thing about it is that it doesn't have to be fixed. For me, I had been married about 12 years before I seriously started being willing to look at getting pregnant because I was very tokophobic. I was so scared of childbirth, I just wouldn't go there. And it started off when I actually went to the doctor and I said, look, my husband really wants kids. He's not hassling me, but I really don't. Can I just have a cesarean if I need one, please? And actually, this doctor was really good because he recognised I looked like a frightened little child, and he actually spoke to me like a loving father. And I guess for some people that might feel a bit patronising, but actually at the time it's really what I needed because I was terrified in this office with him. And he said, "But don't you know that your body's been made for birth? Has no one told you that actually you can do this?" And I sat there going, not really. And I was just, my head was full of horror stories I'd gathered over time and stories I'd picked up from my mum about when I was born and when my brothers were born. And I kind of I realised much later on that I'd mashed together the stuff I'd seen in films of women screaming with my mum's stories of 48-hour labours and horror stories I'd heard. And I'd woven together this picture of birth as being something women suffer for the sake of having a child. And I really couldn't understand why women would choose to go there. When I approached this journey for me of, is that the whole story? Is that the whole picture? And that doctor perhaps set me on a bit of a path of a search, like a hero's journey of searching and wondering and trying to find some other versions of the stories about birth. And what was really helpful was stories that told me bits of it can be difficult, but that doesn't have to be the final word. And bits of it might be tough, but actually we're more resilient than just that part of our story. So there were those kind of messages that started coming through, those kind of ideas, and I went on a bit of a quest, I guess.
Just wondering, kind of, this is probably 11 plus years ago, like where you went, and obviously, like probably you couldn't just hop on Instagram and
type in positive birth and see what came up.
Yep. No, you're absolutely right. At the time, looking on social media and stuff really wasn't what I was doing. I had some books that people lent me. So some hypnobirthing books, not so much about the hypnobirthing bit, but the bit about the physiology of birth and hormones, and actually discovering that when that doctor said, don't you know your body's made to birth, some of that physiology stuff taught me actually about how the body does change, how the body can open, how the tailbone moves, how some of those things that actually help birth happen more effectively. I didn't know about those. Things like contractions come and go. I had no idea that contractions come and then you rest and then they come and then I didn't know any of that. And I had no idea that the hormones are there to help me, and that positions and the way I put myself physically can help too. So books I especially thought were good and I found especially helpful were Ina May's Guide to Childbirth, because the first half was so full of really good physiology and hormone teaching. And then the second half was lovely because it was full of positive, affirmative stories. And I remember my husband and I read a chapter each night to each other. And it was just really helpful to start to get that new picture. And then I also, actually between children, I read a book called Birthing from Within by Pam England. And that's actually the book that changed me most. And I actually ended up becoming a Birthing from Within mentor because I just found it so amazing. So those two books were especially helpful. But talking to people and rather than asking, well, what was your birth story? Actually asking, what did you learn from the experience you had? Or what did you do that you'd want to do again? Or what wouldn't you do next time out? Those kind of questions that get you that kind of really helpful, juicy information that can be useful in the long run.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I guess so aligned with what I kind of hope this podcast will grow to be about. And I might pinch those two questions because I think they're so useful, isn't it? And that's what you really need to know. Yeah, what did you do that you do again? And what maybe wasn't so helpful? Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And what obviously you have got two children now. So at some point during that journey, you kind of decided that you would like to have a baby, or maybe you didn't. But yeah, tell us kind of how you got to that stage of kind of being pregnant with your first child.
Yeah. So both kids, I actually got pregnant very easily, and I was very fortunate in that. I know lots of people actually struggle to get pregnant, and especially when they're in later years, and it was later years for me getting pregnant. But I had a very healthy pregnancy with my daughter until I got to 36 weeks. I thought I was kind of on track for low risk, preparing for a home birth. I really wanted a home birth because I thought it would be more likely that I would be attended by midwives that I might know from the community. And I also wanted that setting where I would feel more able to have a little bit of control about what room I was in and what I would do and where I would go. And I wanted the least interference as possible from medical staff, unless I was ill. If I was ill, then fair enough, I needed medical help. But so I was on track for a home birth. But actually, at my 36-week check, my midwife found out that I had very, very, very high blood pressure. The baby was still breech, and they also thought I might have cholestasis, which is a liver condition that makes you itch a lot. And there is very old research, but it's research that they still use these days, that says actually there's a slight link between cholestasis and stillbirth. And because to do more research on that might risk the possibility of people having stillbirth, they obviously don't do modern research on this. They just get you in hospital, and if at all possible, help the baby to be born around 37 weeks. So at 36 weeks, I was in hospital, which was a place I really didn't want to be. And I was quite belligerent with staff, my husband told me. But actually, my intention wasn't to be belligerent. I was terrified. I really didn't want to be in hospital, and I really didn't want to be ill. And I really wasn't at all happy at being there. And I was scared witless. And I'd not, other than as a baby, I'd been in hospital. I'd never really needed to be in hospital at all. So yeah, I was 36 weeks in hospital. Suddenly all these three things were going on, and I was really, really scared. And I'm guessing the listeners might relate to that. Somewhere along the line in our birth journey, we can be thrown the biggest curveball ever, or a curveball that's enough to scare us, or think that all the things we hoped could happen suddenly can't happen anymore.
Because you mentioned that first trip to the doctor, you'd kind of said, is it possible just to have a Caesarean? And then you'd obviously come on quite a journey. And I presume before this admission to hospital, you'd kind of, you were saying you're hoping to give birth at home. And then what were you kind of thinking when this all was suddenly derailed, particularly as kind of cesarean had been your first thought?
Yeah, at that point, I think I was big time fight or flight mode. So I probably wasn't thinking straight about how my daughter would be born. And to begin with, it was just, can we get my blood pressure down? Because it stayed high, even though I was actually in hospital for 6 days before she was born. It still didn't really come down, even with medicine, very much. But yeah, you're right. In those 6 days, what Nick and I, my husband and I, the journey we went on in those 6 days, that kind of crash course journey, was, well, if we can't have a home birth, what's going to be safest and what's going to be best now? And how it turned out is that the medical staff proposed quite a lot of interventions. They wanted to try and turn the baby and then turn it again if it didn't turn, and then induce me. And if that didn't work, induce me again. And if any of those things didn't work, to give me a cesarean. And I talked to a lot of people from hospital, including the midwife I'd had, who was a real ally and really helpful. And she said, gosh, it sounds a bit like a snakes and ladders game. You could go up a ladder and then back down one of the snakes to a cesarean, or up that ladder and back down again to a cesarean. And my husband did lots of research about cholestasis and about breech and about high blood pressure. And we weighed up lots of stuff. We did lots of that using the BRAIN acronym to find out what the benefits and risks of each thing are, and weighed it all up. And actually, knowing how fearful I was of medical intervention, the idea of submitting to a lot of different processes to try and make my baby turn and try and make my baby come early and all that kind of thing, just for us didn't sound safe and didn't feel right for us. So although that was the medical recommendation at the time, we decided to ask for a cesarean. Acknowledging why the doctors had said that might not be best, acknowledging that it wasn't what we wanted, but that in these circumstances, even especially if it was going to turn into a cesarean anyway, it would probably just be best to plan for an elective cesarean, and make it as gentle and as lovely and as family-centred a cesarean as possible. And at that time, 11 years ago, people weren't really talking about family-centred cesarean like they do now. But Nick and I thought, well, what would we want? And made some of those happen at the time.
Yeah, I'd love to hear more. And it was actually just thinking in my head, 11 years ago, I wonder what that would have looked like. And even was it easy to get the agreement on the cesarean once you and Nick had decided that was the path that you'd take under the circumstances?
Yeah, thankfully the consultant didn't try and argue lots with us or persuade us otherwise. There were times where they tried to get me to make a decision when Nick wasn't there, and I said, well, I actually need to talk about this with my husband, so I'll let you know when you come for your rounds this evening or something like that. So the consultant already knew that we were taking our time and wanting to think about it and wanting to be involved in the decision. Also, I talked to a couple of midwives about the different things we were considering. So the midwives may well have given the consultant a bit of a heads up that perhaps we weren't the kind of people who would just say yes without really having enough information to make an informed decision. So yeah, the consultant was actually okay about it and understood. And we very calmly and very politely explained why we thought it was the right decision in the circumstances. And actually the consultant was fine with that. One thing that was a big surprise was he said, okay, then we'll book that for tomorrow then. And my husband was like, whoa, wait a minute. It's only 37 weeks. I'm not ready. He was like, I'm not ready. I haven't set up the car seat. I haven't done this. I haven't done that. Whoa, it's too soon. And that was quite funny for me. Poor husband. I then actually got quite excited. I was like, I'm going to meet my baby. This is just the most exciting thing ever. Yeah. And although I was very scared of childbirth, I somehow, for some reason, wasn't scared of cesarean. And I know for lots of people they are. And lots of people are very scared of giving birth that way. But I don't know why, but for some reason that didn't scare me. It wasn't that bit that was an issue for me.
So once the decision was made, I'd love to hear kind of, if you're happy to share how, all about the birth and your memories of it and the kind of, what you were kind of glad to have asked for and that sort of thing.
Yeah. There are a few bits I'd love to tell you about, because one of the reasons why I struggled with being in hospital for 6 days was because at that time I was very, very scared of hearing a woman in labour. I was so scared of that that screaming thing I'd seen on the television, and the idea of someone suffering and not being cared for really, really scared me. So being in an antenatal ward for 6 days with some people coming in labour, in early stage of labour, was actually quite scary for me. And I remember the day before Elise was born, in the afternoon, a young woman came in and was in labour. It was quite obvious because of the noises she was making, as her contractions came and went. And it was around the time when we were having to have that quiet time in the afternoon. I don't know whether they still do it in antenatal wards, but there was this section of the afternoon where you were encouraged to have a rest and not have visitors. So when the ward was at its quietest, this girl came in on her own and was labouring behind a curtain on her own. And at the time, instead of feeling compassionate and sorry for her to start with, I got really angry, which I feel a little bit ashamed to admit right now, but I got really angry because I was like, I didn't want to hear this. I'm really scared of this. I don't want to hear a woman in labour and not being cared for. And I had a little bit of a kind of tantrum on my bed and kind of spat my dummy out. And I was kind of having this conversation with God in my head going, I don't want to be here. I don't want to hear this. I'm not happy about this. And it was like, once I'd had my little tantrum, it was like this still small voice kind of said to me, but who is the person you should really be worrying about right now? Who's the person that's struggling right now or might be struggling right now? Is it you with your headphones in, throwing a tantrum because you don't want to be here? Or is it that poor person on the other side of the curtain who is on her own? And that was quite humbling, as you might imagine. And after a little while, I was like, yeah, okay, you're right. It's not me. It's that person. She's over there on her own. Everybody can hear her. That must be really difficult. And this compassion rose up in me. And actually, it was that quality of compassion that turned around the situation for me, from being really scary to realizing actually this person was going through a really significant time and her body was doing really powerful things and she was on her own. And anyway, as the afternoon unfolded, I discovered that she was actually a looked after child. Her foster mum came in and I got talking to her, and they, when she talked to this girl, she was only a girl, probably 16 or 17. And the girl actually asked if I would come in and be with her. So actually I ended up being with this woman, this very young woman, labouring. So what is remarkable, and it is wow, because I didn't actually get to labour at all. I didn't even have Baxter Hicks in this first birth. But being in hospital next to her as her contractions came and went, and being with her as she tried out a birth ball, and being with her as we adjusted the bed to try and keep her upright, and being with her as she laboured, gave me this really healing opportunity to discover, by actually seeing for like 2-3 hours, what a labouring woman looks like. And it was so powerful and so healing for me. So I didn't experience natural birth myself, but I attended to someone in a very informal way who was labouring themselves and saw that actually it was amazing, and how contractions came and went, and how trying different things helped, and how the different people who came to help her helped, or how the midwives came and went, but her foster mum and her sister stayed and I stayed. And actually, I didn't stay until the end of her birth, but I stayed. It was probably about an hour before that I needed to go because friends came to visit me. But the lady in the bed next to her told me afterwards that she actually birthed very quickly after I'd gone, because she had been upright and she needed to go to the loo. And when she went to the loo, the baby came down very nicely and the baby was born very quickly. But that's something I wanted to share with your listeners, was actually the terrifying experience of being 6 days in hospital where I absolutely didn't want to be, ended up being a really healing opportunity, because I was invited to be compassionate about somebody else. And then I had that opportunity while I was there. And the time that felt most dark and most scary actually turned into the most amazing gift. And I couldn't have anticipated that. When I went into hospital belligerent and terrified, I had no idea that was going to be part of that story and how beautiful that was.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you. I can't help but think about your own blood pressure as you tell that story, and imagining you kind of, so near the end of your own pregnancy. But yeah, that's so encouraging, isn't it? That sometimes, things come to us when we least expect them, and just being able to to show compassion for her and all that she taught you by the sounds of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Just being with her taught me so much. And I've always been someone who's, and I still am, someone who's very focused on doing and fixing and being busy and blah, blah, blah. But actually, all that it needed to learn that amazing lessons was to be with her. It didn't require me to do very much at all. And that was really, really good. Really, really good.
Yeah, definitely. And it's what we've lost. I mean, culturally, we've lost quite a lot of things from the way that women would have birthed, previously. But yeah, and this podcast is, would never have been needed if we grew up in cultures where birth was just, not, a kind of community process. And the sort of just being with other women was kind of the norm. But very special to be able to experience that, and just at the right time, possibly, as you were going to have your own baby the next day.
Yeah, absolutely. It was very timely and it felt like a real gift. And then, you're right. We then had the evening to prepare to meet our little one by Caesarean the next day. And I hadn't been home those 6 days. So we actually said to the midwives, look, can we go home and do the things we were going to do, what we hoped we'd do the night before our baby was born, eat curry and do other intimate things that, you might want to do the night before you're going to have a child and never have any freedom again. So I did that, and it was really nice. It was really nice to go home and have curry and just be together and dance together. And we made a soundtrack. We made a kind of playlist of what we wanted to have played while she was being born. And do those things so that the birth the next day was really special by Caesarean. So we picked the clothes that we'd want her to be dressed in. And one thing that was really important to me was actually having some music that we had chosen, because we had some teaching about Caesarean as part of the antenatal classes we'd been in. And they said that often the surgery will just have whatever's on the radio playing. And I said to my husband, I really want our own music playing. So we made a soundtrack, and we went and got batteries for a docking station, because we're talking 11 years ago. So I got my iPod Nano. Some of you aren't listening might not even know what one of there is. I had an iPod Nano in a docking station with batteries, so that no one in the surgery could say, well, you can't have that because you've got to plug it in, or you can't have that because it takes up too much room. We just thought, if we take this in, it's very small, then there shouldn't be any issue whatsoever in having this soundtrack, this right soundtrack. So it was great when we went into surgery. There are bright lights and there are a lot of people in a Caesarean theatre, but thankfully we had a bit of teaching about that, so it wasn't a surprise that there were all these different people playing different roles. And the anaesthetists always seem to be very funny, so they were very funny and they put me at ease. I've got lots of photos of me with big smiles on the table, about to have this very big injection that I didn't look at. I didn't look at the spinal block. And then when I lay down, they check whether the spinal block has worked by spraying cold spray on your skin. And it had worked, and it was working really well. And I've just remembered, I'd forgotten this bit of my story, but one of my friends knew that I'd really wanted a home birth in water at home, and the idea of getting into warm water and it being a relief. And she prayed for me, and even though I wasn't going to have this home birth, she recognised that I really had wanted this comforting, warm experience. And actually what was amazing was when the spinal block took for me, it felt very warm. It felt like the lower half of my body got very, very warm, almost as if I'd got into a home birth pool of hot water. And at the time, again, that was something really lovely, was actually something that I'd wanted and that was important to me. It wasn't exactly the same, but there was something of it in this new experience that was similar. And the music that was playing was just the right music we'd chosen. And then this beautiful song played as my daughter was being born. And she did go over to the resuscitator and have a few tiny little tweaks and treatments and things, but she was back on my chest probably within a minute. And when she was born and taken over to the side, my husband was able to go with her. And it was only about 2 meters away. It was just to the side of me, about 2 meters away. But he was with her and he was taking photos. And then she came back and she was with me. And it was really, really special that in that journey of 6 days, I'd gone from terrified to being able to just work through lots of those fears, to then having this experience of attending a woman in labour and seeing that it wasn't the terrifying thing I thought it was. and then planning for my own birth to be really special, even though it was very medical. And then having these special experiences when she was actually born, of feeling warm, as if I was in water, and also the right music playing and setting that scene so it felt like that special birth. So I wanted to share those things because there were these opportunities, even though the unexpected happened, and in a way the worst happened, it wasn't the end of the story. There was so much more to be discovered that was really, really good.
Yeah, that's great. And on the kind of gentle cesareans, did you feel very well supported, that you kind of wanted your own music, and were there any other things that you asked for, or things that just happened that you really, you've mentioned obviously that your daughter kind of being with you and your husband throughout, but yeah, I was just wondering if there were any other bits that kind of really helped, or really helped it make that special experience.
Yeah. So before my daughter was born, and before we actually went into theatre, a midwife had told us, oh no, we couldn't take our own music in. That wouldn't be allowed. But I was quite determined. So that's why we went away and worked out. We were like, well, they can't say no if we take our own music in and take a docking station. We don't need their electricity. We don't need anything from them. And actually, when we got to the theatre and we said, look, we brought our own music, here's the thing. The surgeon was like, oh, that's great. No one does that. Why don't they do that? That's such a lovely idea. I was like, probably because that midwife's telling people they can't have it. I didn't say that out loud, but that might be why. So listeners, if you're listening and you're going to have a cesarean, perhaps, and even if someone tells you you can't have your music, you might be able to if you just sort it out for yourself. And I didn't know at that time that I could have worn my gown back to front so that my chest would be able to be skin to skin straight after the surgery. But I did have a midwife with me who got Ellie's breastfeeding while I was in the recovery room very quickly. So that's something I didn't do because I didn't know about it, but could do now. And it's very easy to do. You just wear your gown back to front. I didn't have, sometimes people see pictures of cesarean and both arms are out, also almost crucifix style, where they don't have an arm free. But thankfully, the people who set me up for my cesarean left my right arm available. So I was able to hold her. I was able to have her on my chest and things. So that was something that just happened without having to ask for it. I had that hand free. They didn't bring her out gradually. Sometimes with gentle cesareans now, they'll actually ease the baby out a little bit and then allow the womb to actually push the baby out gradually. We didn't have that, but that's something we could have asked for afterwards. And at the time, I didn't think to ask for my placenta either. I wasn't at the point of wanting to do something with a placenta. It didn't even occur to me. So there are other things that we could have had or could have asked for, but we didn't at the time. But having the music and being able to take photos, being able to be together, Nick and I close, and then Nick being able to be with Elise near the resuscitator and then with me, and then her holding the baby in recovery, were all things that really mattered to us, and we did have. And I think he did cut the cord. Even back then, they were up with that.
Did you watch Elise being born, or the drapes? Sometimes they can lower the drape.
Yeah, I didn't. I didn't know at the time that was something to ask for or to consider. It may have been because I know my husband can be quite squeamish, that even if I'd fancied doing that, I might not have asked for it because of him. But the music and holding her was the important bit, and being helped to feed was the really important bits for us. And picking and choosing like that, because some of your listeners will be like, well, delayed cord clamping is an absolute, and the wanting to see is an absolute, and then for someone else it will be something different that's really important. But yeah, just finding ways to make those bits that are really important for you more likely to be a possibility, by asking in advance or taking what's needed to make it possible, like the docking station and stuff like that. Those things were worth doing and worth making happen. Yeah,
absolutely. And it's just so valuable to hear your reflections, because you don't know, you can't ask for what you don't know, can you? So that thing you're saying about your arm, I could imagine being able to hold my baby, support my baby on my chest would make a huge difference.
Yes. But
yeah, it wouldn't even occur to me to think to kind of ask for that in advance. That's why it's so brilliant to hear people's real experiences and like you say, that kind of didn't, that actually just happened for you, but it may well not for somebody else unless they can ask for it in advance.
Yeah. And they can also, they they stick sensors on your body to monitor you. Those can actually be stuck on your back. They don't have to be stuck on your chest. So, I was saying about wearing the gown back to front so that the baby can actually get to your breast and get to you skin to skin. That can help. But also they can stick those sensors on your back and get exactly the same monitoring information that they need. And then you don't even have anything on your chest to get in the way, like sensors or anything. So that's another thing to be worth asking for, is to say, just as they're about to stick them onto some, can you stick them on my back, please, instead of on my front? Little things like that are worth asking for. And even if someone outside the theatre says, oh, no, you can't have that here, ask again when you're in theatre, because actually the theatre staff might be like, yeah, no problem at all, that's fine.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. And how did you feel kind of straight after the birth? And you're mentioning about getting breastfeeding established in recovery, which was important to you. And how did you feel during the operation as well? Would be really great to hear. And then kind of immediately afterwards. Yeah.
So during the operation, Nick and I actually, as far as I know about him, but I felt really excited, because I was like, I'm going to meet my baby. And I think there's also a big amount of relief. I don't need to go through all of those different interventions that they were saying they wanted to do to me, which I really didn't like the sound of at all. So there was big relief, big excitement. And actually it happened very quickly. A caesarean's very fast. So the baby tends to be out within 10 or 15 minutes, really quickly. And then the sewing up after is only about half an hour. So all in all, you might be in theatre, as long as everything goes smoothly, about 40, 45 minutes. So it happened really fast. She was actually out before I realised, and it was hearing her cry that made me realise, oh, goodness, she's out already, so it's very efficient, and I was very excited. And then actually what I felt in the caesarean is actually the drugs kick in and you feel really spaced out. And I've never been high, but what I assume you'd feel if you were a bit high, that your kind of language, your words slur, and actually you're a bit kind of floaty and a bit spaced out. And the photos and the videos we have, I look very loved up, as if I'm on maximum oxytocin, So very excited, and then just really kind of spaced out, very happy, very sleepy and floaty and fluffy from the drugs. But I was very fortunate. She fed very well, and actually I went on to feed no problem afterwards, because some people feel if they have a caesarean, they're not going to be able to establish breastfeeding. They worry that that's not going to work. And that's not always the case. So I was able to feed, and I did carry on, and I got help from a La Leche League group afterwards, and La Leche League were fantastic at helping, because they could help on the phone and they could help face to face if I could get to a meeting. But getting that early help with breastfeeding meant that it was established even after a caesarean. So I'd say to the listeners, if you know you're going to have a caesarean, or if you end up having a caesarean, don't feel like you're not going to be able to feed, because if you get that help in, there's help out there that can help with positioning and attachment and making sure your milk comes in, even if it is a bit delayed because of the drugs.
We need to work a little bit harder, don't we, to get the support than would be ideal, but it certainly is out there. Did you feel that your milk was a bit delayed coming in, or that wasn't particularly true for you anyway?
It didn't seem to be an issue for me. I probably, because I was tokophobic, I'd probably focused so much on birth, I hadn't actually thought very much or researched a huge amount about breastfeeding. I had gone along to LLL antenatally, and that was really helpful. To actually do a session with the breastfeeding group beforehand was really helpful. And the antenatal classes had done an afternoon on breastfeeding too. So I did have that, but I don't think afterwards I was analysing whether my milk had come in or not. It did when it did, rather than me worrying about whether it had or not.
It just worked. Yeah, that's great. Now I'm tempted to be a bit greedy now, Aileen, because I'd love to hear a bit about your second birth. Yeah, if you're willing to share. I just think your reflections are so valuable, and you obviously have really taken the time to process a lot. So I'm sure you've got some nuggets from your second birth as well. Are you happy just to tell us a little?
Yeah, that'd be nice. Yeah. Between my first and second birth, I actually did even more work on the tokophobia. I realised that although I'd had all those experiences in hospital and really helpful experiences that were unpicking the fear, there was still lots of fear there, and there was still lots of desire in me to control things. And when I read Birthing from Within, I realised that actually the thing about birth is the more you try and control it, actually the more difficult it can be. And I realised that I needed to learn to be as flexible as I possibly could be to kind of navigate the unknown that birth always brings up for us. Now, at the time, I had no idea what that actually meant. It felt like alien language to me. How on earth do you begin to be flexible? Was really confusing concept to me. So I actually went and did some training with Birthing from Within. I read lots more books. I spent lots more time with midwives. I started to go to a group called Birth Art Cafe, which is a bit like Maternal Journal. And it was so helpful to actually process things through pictures and discussion and words and all those kind of things, and journal a lot about what I was grappling with. And those things were really, really helpful in continuing that journey of unpicking my fear. And when we got pregnant with our second child, I still wanted that home birth experience, but I was well aware in the back of my head that that might still not happen, and I needed to make the best of whatever birth threw at me on the day, So actually we did have two amazing NHS midwives who attended me in the community in the second pregnancy. And one had been an independent midwife and then had gone to work for the NHS, and the other had been a midwife for about 40 years. So both of them were very happy, as long as I was well and didn't get ill, to work towards an HBAC, a home birth after Caesarean. Now, of course, they weren't allowed to promote that. They weren't allowed to suggest I did that, but they were able to support me in my request to do that. And that's what we worked towards with the second pregnancy. And actually, in the second pregnancy, I didn't get cholestasis. I didn't have high blood pressure. And the baby was head down all the way through the pregnancy. Every time I had a scan, baby head down, baby head down, baby head down. What a relief, because after having breech, you get a bit worried it's going to happen again. So I didn't get ill the second time. And this time I actually felt more, I'd learnt so much from the first birth and then so much from the second pregnancy and the work that I'd done in between, that by then I knew about spending the last month just enjoying resting, enjoying oxytocin. And I watched lots of comedians and I read comedy books and I did lots of things that made me laugh. And I knew not to keep trying and forcing and striving to make it happen. I knew that in that last month I needed to rest and enjoy and laugh and things like that. And I knew that I wanted to do something with my placenta afterwards, regardless of how I birthed and all these kind of things. Because I found that there's only so much you can learn from one birth, and then the second birth, and if you have a third or fourth, you learn something new every time. So my son was born at home, and he was actually born on his due date. Although I had lots of plans about what I was going to do if I went over my dates. I guess a big milestone was whether I would get past 37 weeks with him, because I hadn't with my daughter. So that felt like a big milestone, and the journaling and the drawing and things really helped me navigate that milestone and that feeling of, will this all happen? Will it all come crumbling down again? Will it all go wrong again? And I did actually have him at home, and he was born very, very quickly, within 4.5 hours, active labour. But what was interesting was about 5 hours after, I was still having a bit of a bleed every time my womb was contracting to go back small again. I was still having a bit of a bleed, and my midwife decided that didn't look good, and I was blue lighted into hospital afterwards, and had some treatments afterwards which weren't nice, and I wouldn't encourage someone to have one of those if they had any choice, just to make sure that I wasn't bleeding for a really bad reason, like my cervix had a tear or something else. So I spent that night in hospital, but then the next day came home. So I had my home birth. 5 hours later, we went into hospital, these rather unpleasant treatments afterwards, and then came home. But what was really interesting, now that I'm 9 years after that, is I realised that nearly everything I was scared of happening before I had these pregnancies, ironically, actually did happen. So if I think back to all the things I was scared of, I might have this and I might have that and I might have this and my organs are going to move and I might get piles and I might get prolapse and I might get this and I might get that, blah, 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 blah. All the lists that you could come up with. Ironically, I actually have gone through all of them. And yet I'm still here and it didn't break me. And I thought that I couldn't cope. I thought I wasn't strong enough. I thought the suffering would break me. And I was really scared of being broken. And I was really scared of being alone and having to suffer alone. And actually none of it's broken me. And by taking one little step at a time, each experience has actually made me stronger and realize I'm more resilient than I thought I was, and I'm more able to overcome than I thought I was. And even the scariest times I can go through and find something in them that helps me be more compassionate, more loving to myself, more loving to others in the long run. And that's why I haven't mentioned this, but that's why I've got into helping other people who are scared of birth. That's why I now do the job I do. Because sometimes as women, we can feel like we can't do it, or we're given this message that we can't do it, or it needs to be managed by other people. And sometimes we then think that's because we're not enough. But actually, we're amazingly resourceful and we're amazingly resilient, and we are amazing at growing and learning through difficult experiences if we're given the chance to and the support to. And yeah, that's the thing out of my second birth is it was lovely to have a home birth, and oh my goodness, contractions are so powerful. I had no idea. But actually, I just had these experiences of discovering that the things I was most scared of in my life and I thought were going to break me didn't.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I'd love to know for the actual births, both of them, because where you said being scared of suffering, did you find that, would you look back on those experiences and was there suffering? I read something that really resonated with me about birth can be difficult and testing and intense and all those things, but actually there's a real distinction between pain and suffering. And obviously you were anticipating suffering, but I'd love to know whether, having come through it, whether you felt that you actually did suffer, or whether it was just an intensity of experience, but you wouldn't now quite use that word.
That's really interesting, the distinction between pain and suffering. Yeah, I think reflecting back, I think the times I would say I felt like I was suffering was when the times when I was fighting and trying to wrestle with what was happening. And it was until I got to the stage of being able to surrender or accept or give myself over to the experience. And I remember other people way back before my first birth and in between my first and second birth, people talking about surrender. And I felt like I didn't like the word surrender. In fact, I really quite battled with it. It felt like weakness. But I think the times I felt like I was suffering were when I tried to fight what I was just going through. So that time when I got taken into hospital at 36 weeks and my husband said I was being belligerent, it felt like suffering because I felt terrified. I didn't want to be there. I felt alone. It was really scary. But actually, that process of 6 days helped me get to the point where I could surrender to being in that situation and try and make the best of it. And actually, it didn't take very long to surrender to it. It probably took overnight. And then the next morning, okay, how are we going to make the best of being here? And I think in the brief moment of some of the treatments after my second birth, it might have felt like suffering. But I don't remember it as suffering now, looking back at it. It was unpleasant and I wouldn't want to go through it again. But it wasn't suffering. I think if I'd held on so tight to my birth has to look like this in a really fixed way, that would have created suffering because it would have been too rigid. But working towards a desire for some kind of flexibility about what happened kind of created enough space for suffering not to have any part of it, and for some people that might be, having a plan A, B, C, and D, and that would give them enough flexibility to navigate a few things. For other people, it might be that they really can just respond in the moment to what happens and not even feel like they have to have a plan A, B, C, or D. But because I had a teaching background and I was used to planning things and everything's pinned down, I probably needed the more A, B, C, and D approach. So at least there was some illusion of me having a say in what was going on.
Yeah, no, definitely. Another thing I'd love to ask you is in the kind of surrendering concept, because of our culture and because of our maternity system and all sorts of things, a lot of women might say, oh, I'm just going to go with the flow. And by meaning that, they mean, don't really want to engage with what's going to happen. But obviously in your story, in order to surrender, you've actually done quite a lot of work to get to that point. And I'd love your opinion and your kind of reflection on what that means, the kind of difference between just going with the flow in the sense that you're not going to think about it at all, and kind of the process you're talking about, which is really perhaps getting yourself, what was right for you, it'd be different for other people, but getting yourself in a position to be able to surrender. I'd love to hear your kind of reflections on that.
Yeah, no, it's good that you've picked up that those two things are very different. At no point in all of this did I kind of innocently bury my head in the sand and go, well, I'll just go with the flow and I'm not going to engage. But there are lots of people that would use that tactic. Well, I'll just go, and they say it, don't they? I'll go with the flow on the day. And what can be tricky about that, and what can be a problem about that, is that you actually have no idea whose flow you're going to be going with on the day, and whether they have time to be attentive to your own flow and your body's own flow, or whether they're actually looking after multiple people at the same time, and they're exhausted themselves, and they've got all these other emergencies that they've got to tend to, and actually their flow can end up being really out of kilter with what your baby and your body are doing, and then that can create a real clash, a difference in what they want to happen and try to get you moving down, and the timing of that and all that kind of thing, and what your body wants to do. And so you're right when you notice that at every stage, yes, I did have to surrender to the process, but I did do quite a bit of research about, well, what might that process actually look like, and what might be the different possibilities that I actually need to surrender to here. And actually, I think when I say surrender, I think I was actually, rather than surrendering to the medical staff and what they wanted, it was more a surrender to myself and what I wanted. So there was a lot of this really internal work going on, this real character transformation that was going on. And that's probably why the book Birthing from Within spoke to me so much, because it was about this stuff that was going on within me, and my own hopes and dreams and expectations, and what I thought mattered, and what that said about me, because perhaps I wanted it to be like this because that would actually make me feel more useful or more hopeful or more this or that or the other. And it was the surrendering to that. It was the surrendering my desires and my hopes, so that I wasn't holding myself up to a set of rules or expectations that were actually unachievable on the day or unattainable on the day, and not feeling that if birth went differently to what I expected, that meant I was less of a person, or it was less of a birth, or it was less of something I hoped it would be. So yeah, in terms of pain and suffering, pain, bits of my birth that felt painful, recovering from a Caesarean felt painful, recovering from a natural birth felt painful too, actually. And for 2 weeks, I couldn't actually sit down after my natural birth either. Those bits were painful. In terms of suffering, when I battled with myself about being in hospital and I didn't want to be there and I was scared, and that tiny bit after my second birth where I had some treatments I didn't like, those bits might have felt like suffering. But there were all of these other experiences, all of these things that made me grow to be so much stronger and so much more creative and so much less fearful. And I really want to be someone who's not driven by fear. I really want to be someone who's free from fear. And these experiences helped unpick lots of those ways that fear was trying to control me. And that was wonderful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you so much. And I mean, you may well not, because you've shared so much with us already, but have you got any last wisdom that you want to hand over to listeners about your births, and about your kind of how you reflect on them positively? Just anything that springs to mind.
Yeah. One thing I'd say is if you're someone who processes out loud or needs to work through things, then I really encourage you to get someone you can process out loud with, whether it's a friend or a relative, or a group like Maternal Journal, or an antenatal person that will help you one-to-one with that. Or get a journal, actually being able to write and draw and wonder out loud in your journal about your experiences is really, really helpful, so that you're not just grappling with them in your head or going round and round in circles with them in your head. Because it did take, I'm talking to you here, and it's been 11 years that I've been, well, more than 11 years, probably 13 years now, 12, 13 years, I've been grappling with this fear of childbirth, this unpicking of the thing that I thought was most scary in my life. And you want some ways to work with that, so perhaps get a journal, perhaps get someone who will listen to you as you process out loud. I'd say, if you can, don't bury your head in the sand. If you are scared of something, reach out and ask for help about it. Because there are ways of overcoming fears about birth or parenting or whatever it is that you feel scared of. And if you can deal with some of those fears before you're in labour, then it won't trip you up when you're in labour. And it's much better to do that beforehand if you can. And then the last thing is just, as much as you can, be really compassionate with yourself, because the journey through pregnancy and birth into parenting is hugely life-changing, however it pans out, whether it goes exactly how you want or not. It's hugely life-changing. So be really compassionate with yourself and loving with yourself. And just like you would want to love your baby and love your family, try and love yourself in the same way. So give yourself rest times, ask for help and accept help when it's offered, and go easy on yourself, because it's big changes, and you need help. You're not meant to try and do it on your own.
Yeah, brilliant. It was well worth me asking that last question, because I think, all the three of those are so helpful. Thank you so much, Aileen. I've absolutely loved talking to you, and I know what you said will be really useful to people listening in. So thank you very much.
Cool. Thank you so much for listening, Lisa. It's lovely to have someone listen to our birth stories. That's something I didn't add a minute ago, but find some places, if you need to, where people will listen to you without correcting you or interrupting you, because that's a real blessing to be listened to.
Yeah, no, I agree, absolutely, and I love listening to birth stories. So you can always come to me.
Absolutely. Cool.
Thank you, Aileen. Take care.
Bye. Thank you.
This podcast does not present itself as medical advice, and neither should it be taken as such. The views represented here are personal to the women telling their stories. Sorry for this slightly patronising disclaimer, but such is the world we live in today. Always seek out the information you need before making your own decisions.